told your friend you're not okay.
Some days pass by, silently, bringing no sign of change. But there are also days that seem ordinary, yet secretly hold something that will never disappear. That day, January 10th, was initially just a date on the calendar. There was no global commemoration. No major event awaiting the spotlight. No major news preceding it. But it was on this seemingly unambitious day that Jungkook appeared. Not with fanfare, not with visual tricks, not with sensation. He appeared in the simplest yet most captivating form, a dance that didn't call for applause, but instead made the world stop. The video didn't come with a siren. No one expected a retreat. There were no countdown posters that said, "Get ready." Just a silent upload, as if intentionally allowed to flow onto the screen of anyone who opened it without expectation. But as soon as the play button was pressed, the atmosphere changed. There was something about his movements that immediately spread, like a subtle current that touched long before the mind could process it. In a matter of seconds, silence became language, and Jungkook's body became a narrator who needed no words. What sets him apart isn't grandeur. Quite the opposite. Jungkook doesn't hog the spotlight. He doesn't chase the top, doesn't try to prove himself, doesn't try to be better than anyone else. He lets his body speak the truth. An honesty that's powerful, but not intimidating. A calm that's heavy, but not oppressive. He doesn't dance like someone who wants to look great. He dances like someone who already understands the world, and understands himself. Before the first movement even begins, there's a moment of evocative silence. That silence isn't emptiness, it's confidence. A kind of courage possessed only by those who truly own the space they step on. It's as if it's saying, "I don't need time to press. I know you'll wait." And yes, we all wait, unconsciously holding our breath. When he begins to move, it's not explosive. It flows. The rhythm of his body isn't rushed, there's no excessive energy, no movement that feels like it's trying to impress. But that's precisely the magic. Each step feels like a living memory, not a rehearsal repeated 1,000 times. The movement of his shoulders carries a feeling. His body turns are like small, conscious decisions. His hands fall, the way he shifts, the direction he turns, everything feels like a message, not a routine. That's the difference between a dancer and a storyteller. Between a performer and an artist. The Jungkook of today is not the Jungkook of 5 years ago. His movements carry the weight of time, long discipline, invisible pressure, and a composure that takes time to develop. Every small transition contains a journey that doesn't involve the camera. There's maturity in every inch of space he touches. There's no need for dramatic intensity, no need for excessive power. What he demonstrates isn't physical strength, but control. A control that's silent but firm, gentle but absolute. There are moments when his movements taper off, as if he's deliberately condensing emotion so the audience can feel it more intimately. And strangely, the smallest parts actually evoke the greatest resonance. Because not all power comes from explosions, some comes from restraint. From knowing when to pull back a little to allow the meaning to deepen. Many say they feel emotional without understanding why. There's no dramatic scene. No climactic music. No spectacular visuals. Yet something penetrates. It wasn't confusion, it was a human response to unfiltered honesty. That day's dance wasn't just choreography. It was a form of communication that didn't require theory or analysis. It spoke to comfort, to the part of the heart that responds before reason can dictate. What happened next was fascinating. There was no explosive trending, none of the viral semblance that usually accompanies pop phenomena. The public didn't scream, they listened. They rewatched in silence, as if afraid to spoil their first impression. The comments weren't shouts, but whispers. This is real. This is different. This is art. Even those who don't follow Jungkook paused, recognizing that what they saw wasn't just an idol dancing, but an artist entering a new chapter in his career. Why can't this moment be replicated? Because its origins aren't technique. They're the origins of life. It's born from hours of practice behind closed doors, from long waits, from burdens unspoken to anyone, from a process of maturation that quietly forms a foundation. And strangely, after the video spread slowly like a gust of wind that never intended to become a hurricane, the world felt the beginning of something similar, that what happened on January 10th wasn't the end, but the beginning of something bigger. There was an energy hanging in the air, as if Jungkook's movements were leaving a door open, signaling that there were still things he hadn't said. A continuation that wasn't announced in words, but felt by anyone who watched it more than once. Because after the silence he created, it felt like Jungkook was entering an era where art became his most honest language. There was no overly elaborate choreography, no overly flashy costumes, no gimmicks that bound interpretation. There was simply a body fully present. And in that presence, we could see something rarely expressed by stars of his stature: transformation. The change wasn't visible in grandiose steps. It was visible in something difficult to imitate: the calm. The stillness he brought to a space usually filled with cheers and expectations. It's as if he's saying that on one's journey to the top, there comes a point where the sound no longer matters. What matters is the essence. The essence, on January 10th, was that he was ready to move into a phase that was more mature, more personal, and bolder than before. Even dance professionals, who usually dissect every detail of technique, suddenly weren't busy judging. They simply nodded. Because they knew what they were seeing was no longer a performance to be judged. It was a work to be felt. That's what separates an artist from a performer. A performer thinks about how they're seen, an artist thinks about how they touch. And Jungkook, in that video, touched more deeply than many expected. Not just ARMY, not just music fans, but even casual viewers who repeatedly hit the replay button realized that the dance contained something unfinished. There was a subtle message hidden within his slow movements, something that made one wonder, what does he want to say next? The question didn't seek a quick answer. It was a question like an echo, emerging slowly, bouncing back, and returning with a different meaning each time someone watched the video. And this is what made that moment so significant, that Jungkook had created a space where people were willing to pause, to observe, to ask questions, to feel. Because after all the achievements, records, big stages, and global rankings, who would have thought, what was most surprising was something so incredibly quiet? And behind that silence, the world began to see a pattern, that this wasn't just a random episode. Not just a spontaneous post. Not just a momentary dance. This was part of a longer story Jungkook was building. A story of silent growth, of art that doesn't seek applause, of the journey of an individual who begins to realize that he doesn't need to follow the world's rhythm. He can create his own. And from that moment, other signs emerged, signs that can only be seen if one pays closer attention. The look in his eyes during the choreography. The music he chose. The unaggressive yet profound tempo. The way he ended the movement as if he were letting something go. All of this opened up a new understanding, that this wasn't just dancing. This was chapter 1 of Jungkook's new era. And top K-pop, who had been following every step of the way, now realized that January 10th was the starting point of a phase that would be discussed for a very long time to come. Because after that silence, the world waited. Not with panic, not with annoyance, but with quiet curiosity. Everyone wanted to know. If on a seemingly ordinary day, Jungkook could create such a profound moment, what would happen when he created something purposefully? And that question, more than anything else, was proof that a legacy was being formed. Not with thunder, but with breath. With subtle movements. With art that asks nothing, yet gives so much.